Hi, my name is Ruby McDowell, supervisor of the LAMP program, and today I'm going to talk with you about emotional eating. And we're going to try to learn tips for managing food and feelings. Emotional eating occurs when people use food to cover or address their intense emotions. Oftentimes, those emotions are negative. You're sad, you're stressed out, maybe you're grieving, or you're just plain lonely or bored. But happiness or comfort can also trigger emotional eating. So it's not just sad emotions. Think about how many celebrations revolve around emotional eating. Part of the problem is that when the goal is to distract or enhance an emotion, food actually provides the desired result, but only temporarily. So it works, but it doesn't last. And that feeling then creates a habit of utilizing food to address emotions and stops you from utilizing more adaptive approaches to cope with your emotions. We don't always eat just to satisfy physical hunger. Many of us also turn to food for comfort, stress relief, or to reward ourselves. And when we do, we don't usually reach for healthy foods. We reach for junk foods, sweets, other comforting but unhealthy foods. You might reach for a pint of ice cream when you're feeling down, order a pizza, or if you're bored or lonely, or swing by the drive-thru after a stressful day at work. Emotional eating is using food to make yourself feel better. It's filling your emotional needs, but it's not filling your stomach. Unfortunately, emotional eating doesn't fix the emotional problems that you're trying to either avoid or enhance. In fact, it actually is going to end up making you feel worse because afterwards, not only does the original emotional issue remain, but then you feel guilty for overeating. So these are some questions that you can ask yourself to see if you are an emotional eater. Emotional hunger can be very powerful, so it's easy to mistake it for physical hunger. But there are clues that you can look for so that you can tell physical and emotional hunger apart. So emotional hunger comes on suddenly. It hits you in an instant. It feels overwhelming, urgent, whereas physical hunger, on the other hand, comes on more gradually. And the urge to eat doesn't feel as dire or demanding that instant satisfaction. Emotional hunger craves specific comfort foods. So when you're physically hungry, you can eat just about anything that sounds good, including healthy stuff like vegetables. But emotional hunger craves junk food or sugary snacks that provide that instant rush. You feel like you need cheesecake or pizza and that nothing else is going to do. And emotional hunger often leads to mindless eating. How many times before you know it have you opened up a bag of chips and by the end of the TV show you're watching, they are all gone? And you never really paid any attention to fully enjoying eating it. When you're eating in response to physical hunger, you're typically more aware of what you're doing. And emotional hunger isn't satisfied once you're full. You keep wanting more and more, often eating until you're uncomfortably stuffed. Physical hunger, on the other hand, doesn't need to be stuffed. You feel satisfied when your stomach is full. And lastly, emotional hunger often leads to regret, guilt, or shame. When you eat to satisfy physical hunger, you're unlikely to feel guilty or ashamed because you're simply giving your body what it needs. If you feel guilty after you eat, it's likely because you know deep down that you are not eating for nutritional reasons. emotions. The emotional eating cycle. Occasionally using food as a pick-me-up, a reward, or to celebrate isn't necessarily a bad thing. But when eating is your primary emotional coping mechanism, when your first impulse is to open up the refrigerator when you're stressed, upset, you're angry, you get stuck in an unhealthy cycle where the real feeling or problem is never addressed. Emotional hunger can't be filled with food. Eating may feel good in the moment, but the feelings that triggered that eating are still there. And you often feel worse than you did before because now you have all these unnecessary calories that you've just consumed. Compounding the problem, you stop learning healthy ways to deal with your emotions, and you have a harder and harder time controlling your weight, increasing feelings of powerlessness over both food and your feelings. But no matter how powerless you feel over food and your feelings, it is possible to make positive change. You can learn healthier ways to deal with your emotions, avoid triggers, conquer cravings, and finally, put a stop to emotional eating. When you establish patterns to overcome emotional eating, that's when you can stop for a minute and think back onto it the last time you gave into emotional eating. And then when asked, okay, well, did that help? Your answer will most likely be, yeah, it did for a little while. I was distracted. But as soon as you finish eating, the original hurt is going to resurface. And you might add to your original upset because you caved in and you did what you told yourself you weren't going to do it. It's common for people to also struggle with difficult or uncomfortable feelings and emotions. There is an instinct or need to quickly fix or destroy these negative feelings, which leads to unhealthy behaviors. Emotional issues connected to emotional eating usually fall into one of the following categories. Stress, which we're all under a lot of, anxiety, impatience, depression or feeling blue, feeling tired, having low energy levels, unmet needs for fun, play, excitement, or entertainment, too much work and not enough play, a desire for love, affection, appreciation, or romance, or anger, resentment, bitterness, or frustration. And lastly, to fill an emptiness, an insecurity, and just a desire for comfort. So some triggers that you want to avoid. The emotions such as stress are not the only triggers for emotional eating. There's other triggers that you want to look out for. One of the main ones is boredom. Being bored or having nothing to do is a common emotional eating trigger. Many people live very stimulating and active lives, and when they have nothing to do, will turn to food to fill that vacuum. Habits. These are often driven by nostalgia or things that happened in your childhood. An example might be having ice cream after a good report card or baking cookies with a grandparent. Fatigue. It's easy to overeat or eat mindlessly when you're really tired, especially when you're tired of doing an unpleasant task. Food can seem like the answer to not wanting to do a particular activity anymore. Everyone has that friend who encourages them to get a pizza after a night out, or go out for dinner and drinks after a difficult day, or as a reward. It can be easy to overeat with friends and family. If you don't know how to manage your emotions in a way that doesn't involve food, you won't be able to control your eating habits for very long. Diets so often fail because they offer logical nutritional advice, which only works if you have conscious control over your eating habits. It doesn't work when emotions hijack the process, demanding an immediate payoff with food. In order to stop eating emotionally, you're going to have to find other ways to fulfill yourself. It's not enough to understand the cycle of emotional eating or even to understand your triggers, although that is a huge first step. You need alternatives to food that you can turn to. So if you're depressed or lonely, think of something else you can do besides eat. Maybe call a friend, play with your pet, uh, read a book. And if you're anxious, you want to get rid of that nervous energy, getting out for a brisk walk is an excellent thing to do. Blasting music, stress it. If you have a stress ball, squeezing your stress ball. And if you're exhausted, you can take a bath, just light some candles, and maybe even treat yourself with a cup of hot tea. Some more comforting actions to replace comfort food. Again, running a hot bath. If you put lavender oil in it, the aroma is very calming and very soothing, which can help distract you. You could listen to meditative music or to someone who's inspirational, like to a podcast that you've been waiting to listen to, um, writing in a journal, just basically engaging and losing yourself in one of your favorite hobbies. Like if it's artwork or playing music or swimming, no matter what it is, it will take your mind off of the emotional hunger. And lastly, if we learn how to focus on your breathing and feelings of appreciation as you visualize a time and a place that brought you pleasure, when you transport yourself back to that space and time, sometimes that fills the emotional void. 5 steps to reduce emotional hunger. You want to impose a cooling off period. Tell yourself that you can't eat for 15 minutes. After that amount of time, if you still feel like eating, you're free to do so. But during that 15 minutes, you'll be completely the other 4 steps, and your appetite will most likely be reduced. Leave the house if you must, but definitely stay away from the food source for 15 minutes. Emotional overeating often leads to automatic and absent-minded eating, where you don't realize how much you're eating. And eating and by binge eating can be avoided simply by getting away from the food. Mouth hunger is what they call when you see something like a cupcake or a piece of cake and your mouth starts salivating. You're not really hungry for the item, but it's called mouth hunger. So one way to deal with that is by cleansing your mouth. You can rinse the taste of chocolate and cheeseburgers or whatever else you're craving and reduce your emotional appetite. And then the water will also help if you're confusing thirst with hunger, which occurs with surprising frequency. And ask yourself, am I feeling fear, anger, or shame? You don't need to go into deep introspection over this question. Usually the answer is going to pop into your mind instantly. You ask the question and you'll hear the reply in your mind. Yes, I'm worried about my finances. Just the act of honesty, admitting your feelings is usually enough to relieve the urgency associated with emotional hunger. And you can heal yourself by loving yourself, by treating yourself kindly. No amount of self-care is too much. When you fill yourself with love, then there will be no room for negative emotions to exist. We've discussed many coping strategies to deal with emotional eating. I'd like for you to take this opportunity to write down some strategies that you've learned from this presentation, along with signing the bottom of the affidavit that you have watched this video, and turn it in to your LAMP advocate. And here are some wonderful resources on emotional eating that give lots of suggestions and ideas on how to create a life where you're coping with your emotions in a healthy way, which will leave you so much happier.